Lost Ark whipped his way into theaters of June of 1981, meaning that this year is the 40th anniversary for that movie. So Indiana Jones is the brainchild of both George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Well, not really, actually. Actually, originally, the character was called Indiana Smith, and it was created by George Lucas and a friend he knew from college, Philip Kaufman. And he was created a little bit around the same time George Lucas created Star Wars, but he set that movie aside to focus more on Star Wars. So in 1977, George
And then
Lucas
when I
and
told the story to Steve
Steven
on the beach, he
Spielberg
said, "I love
took
it.
a
It's
trip to
fantastic. Let's do it."
Hawaii
He said, "There's
just
only one
before
thing, though."
Star Wars came out. And Steven Spielberg was telling George Lucas about how much he wanted to make a James Bond movie.
What I was
But
doing
George
next, and I
Lucas
said, well, you know what? I've always
pitched
wanted
him
to
an
direct a
idea of a
James Bond
person who
picture.
he think would be better than
And George,
James
so I
Bond
got that
called
beat.
Indiana
I
Smith.
said, what do you mean? He said, I have
And
a
then
better
from
idea.
there
It's called
uh,
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
is when they both really did talked about, or where the idea of Indiana Jones came out. It was actually Steven Spielberg's idea to call him Jones. And so a few years after that, Steven Spielberg brought Lawrence Kasdan in to a room, and then for the next 3 days, him, Spielberg, and Lucas all were working together of writing the script for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so the movie is meant to be a low budget movie. It's meant to be an homage of those classic serials, of those Republic serials that Lucas and Spielberg grew up with in the 40s and 30s uh, about with cliffhangers and very low budget and always going to exotic locations and everything like that. So this movie was basically an inspiration from those serials, and you can definitely see that in the movie. So for the three people out there who has not seen or know about Raiders of the Lost Ark, the story basically follows Indiana Jones, who is an archaeologist and professor who goes around the world look for religious artifacts. In this case, it's the Ark of the Covenant, and so he's basically it takes place in the 30s, and so the Nazis it wasn't a time in where Hitler did wanted to look for religious artifacts, and so he had the Nazis go around the world and look for these religious artifacts. So it's just basically it's your typical good versus evil. Like I said, very similar to those old classic serials of the 30s and 40s. So we go around the world, we meet people, we look at exotic locations, and basically fight people, kill people, blow brains off. The typical good movies, action movie, the way it should be made. So Raiders of the Lost Ark is essentially a mash of a bunch of other inspiration. Like I said, one of the biggest one is what started the whole movie is George Lucas and like those Republic serials, mainly the Marco Zorro, like Zorro's ones of the 30s. There's a lot of similarities to that serial in this movie. The truck, like the desert chase, and the whip, and also one major big one is the clothes that of Indiana Jones, that iconic clothes. That what didn't originate in Indiana Jones. In fact, Charlton Heston in the 50s in Secret of the Incas, which actually is a huge part in this movie. If you watch Secret, that's essentially a precursor to Indiana Jones. And also Alan Ladd's character in China that came out in 1943 has like basically the exact same clothes in of Indiana Jones, and his name was also Dr. David Jones in that movie as well. And so the clothes that Indiana Jones wore is a bunch of like very similar to those like influence of this movie is the movie that Steven Spielberg wanted to make, which is James Bond. This movie, Indiana Jones, is a lot similar to James Bond, and his personality, the way he is, and also the idea of like James Bond is basically how he gets himself in these very ridiculous situations, and you're trying to like wondering how is he going to get out of this situation, and also have like betrayals and exploring exotic locations, meeting beautiful women, killing people, all the good stuff. But when it comes to the characteristic of Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford really did base that characteristic a lot closer to Humphrey Bogart's character of specifically Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and of this no nonsense guy, this pretty serious, hardcore person who is not your typical hero. He has like weakness, he has a dark side, uh, but he is basically a tough guy. Uh, it's very similar. If you watch Treasure of the Sierra Madre and you see a Humphrey Bogart character in that movie, it's very similar to Indiana Jones' personality. And not even that, Lawrence Kasdan based the relationship between Indiana Jones and Marion Ravenwood a lot similar to the relationship in Casablanca between Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. Of these people who have had this romantic history in the past but has gone their separate ways. But now, because of the threat of Nazis in both movies, they have to come back together, set aside their differences, and find love once again in the midst of this conflict or in the midst of the movie. So the relationship of Indiana Jones and Marion Ravenwood is a lot similar to Casablanca. Casablanca. And also the location of the movie and the feel of the movie. The movie is shot like in the desert. A lot of it takes place in the desert, but it doesn't have that. Even though George Lucas based the movie of those Republic serials, Spielberg always admired uh, Lawrence of Arabia. And so, if you watch the movie Lawrence of Arabia, which won 7 Academy Awards, and you watch Indiana Jones, there's a very lot of similarities in the shots and those wide shots and uh, the epic scope, the really bringing that wonder in locations that Spielberg openly said about uh, Lawrence of Arabia, and it is really one of my favorite movies as well. It's a very good movie, and so see like the Indiana Jones is definitely inspired in the feel of the movie. The way it is shot is very much inspired by Lawrence of Arabia. Basically, a lot of John Ford's movie is also heavily inspired Indiana Jones, and also a lot of other of Steven Spielberg's movies. And one thing that I don't hear many people talk about or give praise to is for the suspense in this movie. Uh, Steven Spielberg, especially in his younger years, definitely showed a lot of inspiration towards Alfred Hitchcock, specifically with Jaws. But I will also say with Raiders of the Lost Ark, like there is a lot of moments in this movie where it's very suspenseful. One of the best one is where is towards the middle of the movie and where one of the villains has had poisoned the fruit, and it's very similar to Hitchcock. It reminds me a lot of Hitchcock, is particularly in Sabotage, and where one of the characters basically had a bomb, and we audience know that this scene is like something's not right with the scene. It's going to go bad, but the characters in the movie don't know. So it really does build that suspense, and that was in this movie as well. This movie has quite a bit of suspense into it, and like I said, it's really good. And so, how is it that this movie that is essentially like everything in this movie is inspired by something? How is it that this movie is still considered one of the greatest action movie or movie of like all time? And for me, I think it's because is the fact that it takes everything of a bunch of other stuff, mix it together, but it makes its own world. It built in its own self. It makes its own movie. The characters are all likable, all understandable. This world, you do understand this world, but it cares. It takes itself serious. As nothing, I'm not saying that everyone is serious in this movie. I'm saying that the people working behind this movie had a huge passion for this movie, and they wanted to tell this specific story and that like it involved all of these stuff all mixed together, which is why I think that this movie is still so good and it will still be good for years to come. And that's what movie lacks. And I cannot go on without saying much about the music in this movie by John Williams. He is a master in making theme music. But his inspiration is Bernard Herrmann. And especially, you could definitely hear a lot of that in this movie, similar to Jason and the Argonauts, and also his other movies that he did as well. Those, he does like those adventure types of movies. Uh, but John Williams is a master, and this music is so good with its music. It's very catchy. It's people still I still hum it to this day. Uh, like the music is really good. A lot of movies nowadays are so dated, like you will lose interest in them in the matter of like days or weeks because people working behind it don't really care much for what they're trying to tell. They just want a paycheck, want for you to go to the movies and spend your money and do some for escapism for a short period of time. But what George Lucas and Steven Spielberg wanted to do, they wanted to tell the story that inspired them when they were younger and tell it to a new generation. And they don't make movies like these anymore. Like, comment below if you think there's another movie that's similar to Raiders of the Lost Ark that would speak to today's generation, as opposed to like Raiders of the Lost Ark to speak to like my parents or me, since I was like from the '90s and I grew up watching Indiana Jones. So that's my review for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Please comment below. Let me know, what do you guys think about this movie? Did you what other references or inspirations of Raiders of the Lost Ark specifically? I'm not going to talk about. Don't mention from Temple of Doom or Last Crusade or Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because when I have a chance to talk those, I'll discuss those types. So comment below. Let me know what references or inspirations that I may have missed, and also which one would be your favorite ranking of which one is your favorite Indiana Jones movie. And so I hope you folks enjoyed this review, and I guess we are out of here.